Switzerland, Portugal, the Netherlands, Lithuania, Denmark, Hungary, Austria, France, and Bulgaria. And Mr. Timmermans, could we ask you to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Frans Timmermans. I'm with the European Commission. We have just presented last week the biodiversity strategy and the farm to fork strategy. I'm really excited that on a Friday we can discuss this with Fridays for Future, because if we want this to become a success and even go beyond it at some point, we will really, really need you. We will need you because we are putting a burden on your shoulders and an extra burden on your shoulders now in this crisis. And we have to make sure that the burden we put on your shoulders is accompanied by the right policies so that we improve our environment and we create a sustainable society from the perspective of nature, from the perspective of our economy, and also especially from a social perspective. So that's why I'm really looking forward to listening to you and then perhaps have a discussion on all these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timmermans. We are all here today to bring the attention of the European Commission on our agriculture. If we want a climate neutrality, which is the goal of Europe, we also need to change today's agriculture.
Without further ado, we would like to read you the letter. Guillaume, the floor is yours.
We need a new CAP for tackling the climate crisis. Dear Mr. Timmermans, the corona crisis showed us the weak links of our globalized food system. European countries are struggling with a systemic reliance on food imports, poorly paid seasonal workers, globalized supply chain, and trade. Meanwhile, we are losing biodiversity every day. At least 10% of the total European emissions are caused by agriculture, and farmers are fighting for their survival. We, as European citizens, have it in our hands. With 55 billion euros each year, the EU Common Agriculture Policy, CAP, is one of the biggest subsidy programs in the world. That makes 114 euros per European citizen per year. We have to realize that the CAP is an essential element in solving the climate crisis.
Over 3,600 scientists are calling on action on CAP. They declare that the EU agriculture reforms will fail to challenge the climate crisis and biodiversity loss and risk the future of farming. The irony is that agriculture could provide many solutions. Having production and consumption of animal products could reduce emissions up to 30%. Emissions could be rapidly reduced by restoring our peatland and soils. Negative emissions could be produced due to carbon fixation within our soils, as the Food and Agriculture Organization makes clear. The soil is our hidden ally in tackling the climate crisis. Agroecology and stopping pollution by pesticides can restore biodiversity. And above all, a regional, fair and livelihood-securing agriculture will tackle injustice and deliver a future perspective for farming. To support the key role of our farmers for the climate and our society, we must encourage them with financial guidelines for emissions reduction, biodiversity recovery, and soil carbon fixation in the CAP funds.
The Fridays for Future movement across Europe demands a pathway to climate neutrality for the European Union's agricultural and food sector. We need to transform direct payments into payments for public goods. Public money needs to flow into the transition to sustainable, climate-friendly, and peace and agriculture. What we need is a new, evidence-based, and just CAP. We stand behind farmers and agricultural workers, regardless of whether they farm organically or not. There is no transition without them. It is only by working together that we can make the change.
EU politicians must now deliver the transition and help our farmers in Asia. It is not too late. It's time to act now. EU politicians must recognize that a great hope to combat the climate crisis and the collapse of biodiversity lies in agriculture, and the current CAP is on the verge of destroying it. We must empower our farmers, as they are one of the greatest hopes we have.
Peter, we cannot hear you.
You could not hear me?
Now it's better. The floor is yours.
Excuse me. EU politicians must now deliver the transition and help our farmers and nature. It is not too late. It's time to act now. EU politicians must recognize that a great hope to combat the climate crisis and the collapse of biodiversity lies in agriculture, and the current CAP is on the verge of destroying it. We must empower our farmers, and as they are one of the greatest hopes we have.
Tilman, I guess the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Dear Commissioner Timmermans, thank you very much for listening to our words. The reason why we asked for this opportunity is that we are concerned about our future. We realize that you do so too, as you are putting agriculture at the heart of the Green Deal, and that is a strong signal. Agriculture is the single largest threat behind overshooting the planetary boundaries. That means that agriculture is partly responsible for massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and the fact that we are living in times of the sixth mass extinction. The question of a livelihood securing future will be measured by the success of change in agriculture. The reduction of pesticide use by 50% until 2030, the support of carbon sequestration within the Green Deal, and the protection of 30% of Europe's sea and land that are serious steps to a just future. But we can't wait until 2050. We can't even wait until 2030 to have concrete and efficient reduction goals. We have to acknowledge that there's a change within EU's policy, but you're chasing the wrong target. The 1.5-degree goal sets a clear frame, and that is a carbon budget of 340 gigatons that we will deplete in the next 8 years. Agricultural emissions must be rapidly reduced within this time frame. Therefore, we need clear emission reduction targets within the carbon budget starting by 2020. And indeed, that is possible. We mentioned that in the letter. Agricultural emissions could be rapidly reduced, and above all, agriculture delivers one of the most promising opportunities to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that is a story of hope. With that vision, our farmers could become one of the greatest hopes we have. We have to empower them to make this vision come alive. But the current CAP proposal squanders this vision. The debate about the future of the CAP over the last 2 years showed that the lessons of previous errors have not been learned. The greening has showed once again that socially legitimizing the direct payments is impossible. That is confirmed by the European Court of Auditors. As scientists all across Europe demand, the exit of direct payments must come now. Fridays for Future is calling for the transformation of direct payments into payments of public goods. There's no scientific justification of the direct payments, and especially in times of COVID-19, we have to be serious about distribution of our public money. Too much time was wasted instead of creating a climate-just CAP. The clock is ticking. If we do not want to be surprised by droughts and floods every year, we need a new start in the CAP. The future in which we will comply with the Paris Agreement and the future into which the current CAP proposal will lead us are as far from one another than the man on the moon and his home planet. In fact, the current CAP proposal is not aligned with a Green Deal that is not efficient enough. The Commission has the opportunity to withdraw the current CAP proposal. Use this opportunity for the sake of a climate-just future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Timmermans, hearing this call from the European youth, could we hear your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And a lot of what was said is completely in line with my thinking. because you have a couple of messages. One is go ahead full force with Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategy, cutting in half the use of pesticides, making sure pollinators get working again, and all these things that we are now proposing. The second message you give is see that the farmers become our allies in this, because we need the farmers and they need our support. That's also something I strongly believe in. The third message is reform the common agricultural policy more drastically, because otherwise it will not happen. Now, the risk is that the second objective, helping the farmers, and the third objective could clash if we don't do it right, because many farmers see the cap and even the present cap as their best protection to keep their income, etc. So we need to convince them that their future is better guaranteed with a sustainable agriculture, and that the common agricultural policy is indeed in line with the Green Deal. Now, the European Parliament has tasked the Commission to compare the Green Deal with the present common agricultural policy and then see where changes will be needed. Some of you mentioned the direct payments scheme. You know, too many of the direct payments don't go to the farmers or people who work on the land, but to big landowners. There is really a problem there that we need to fix. Also, we need to use what we then call technically the first pillar, where the direct payments are, to develop eco schemes. So you really help farmers move towards ecologically sustainable agriculture. This is also something we urgently need to do. And don't underestimate the role farmers can play in creating a greener society. You mentioned carbon sink. Our plan is to plant 3 billion trees, and to do this in a scientifically justified, ecologically justified way. We will need farmers and others in rural areas to be the stewards of this and the guardians of this. We will need, if you've seen our biodiversity strategy, we will really need to protect our biodiversity and increase our biodiversity. This is in the long-term interest of farmers, and farming is too much killing biodiversity now. It should be supporting it, and we have put plans on the table to realize that. Now, there was also made of the impact of farming on greenhouse gas emissions. In Europe, about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions is linked to farming. Of those 10%, 70% is linked to animal husbandry. So, you know, the production of meat is the biggest responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. So what we also want to do is not tell people what they should eat, but inform them about the nutritional value of what they eat, where the food comes from, what the environmental impact of the food is, how their behavioral patterns can help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Because the COVID crisis has also created a stronger impetus for people to look at their health. And what am I eating? Is this making me healthy or unhealthy? And we want to be able to provide the information through labeling and other channels so that people can make informed decisions also about their nutrition and about their behavioral patterns. Well, much more to be said, but I'm sure there will be questions. I'd love to go into that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing your thoughts of the open letter with us, Mr. Timmermans. Now there is a possibility for the youth to share their thoughts, remarks, and questions concerning the CAP policy. But there is as well some time for you, Mr. Timmermans, to ask questions or share thoughts with the youth.
Can I start with a question? Because the one thing, and it's not, I mean, it's something I'm struggling with, and all of us are struggling with. Traditionally, the Common Agriculture Policy was started because there was such poverty in rural areas in Europe, and there was a huge problem with food security in Europe. So the two issues of creating a vibrant rural area combined with a necessity, which I think will probably increase, to assure food security is what's driving agriculture policy, and sometimes, frankly, also preventing real reform of agricultural policy. So I would really like to hear your thoughts. How do you maintain these two pillars of an agriculture policy, food security, and a vibrant rural area, with the need to move into what I would call the Green Deal? And any thoughts you have on that is really helpful for us.
Yes, of course. Very good to mention. I think Julian had a comment.
Yes, hi, Mr. Timmermans. Thank you for your time and being with us here. I have a comment on the previous things you said. I'm sorry, not to the question you asked before. I'm sorry, I do not agree with you that the current cap is aligned with the Green Deal, because we had a call in March by 3,600 scientists, which are calling on action on cap, and they saying that. And what do you think about that? What do you don't take this serious that 3,600 scientists are calling on action on the cap? What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Well, I did not say the cap was in line with the Green Deal. I said, on the contrary, we have been tasked by the European Parliament to compare the present cap with the goals in the Green Deal and then come with proposals to make sure the cap is in line with the Green Deal. And we're in the middle of doing that. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the present cap is in line with the Green Deal. Reforms will be necessary. I already mentioned the issue of direct payments not reaching always the people we want them to reach. Not farmers, not people working on the land, but big landowners. That's not the way you're going to create a better socioeconomic situation in rural areas, and not help farmers create an income so that they can make the change we need them to make. So don't get me wrong. I didn't say the present cap is in line with the Green Deal. I said we are going to, tasked by the European Parliament, have to come up with ideas to bring it more in line with the Green Deal.
Bram, I see your mic was up. But I think we will go to Tillman now, but maybe it's also nice to remember the question that Timmermans had for us. Tillman.
So, yeah, I think the problem is that you want to stick to the proposal we have. And I think the scientists made clear that this proposal that is debated over the last 2 years is not in line with the Paris Agreement. And don't get us wrong, we don't want to cut off the subsidies. They are really important for the change within European agriculture. We want that farmers have like a roadmap within the next decade and have a roadmap to deal with the climate crisis. And therefore, we need a new start within the cap, as it has been shown that the current cap and the current cap proposal is not the roadmap that we need for this. And that's why we are calling for a new cap.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but let me repeat. The European Parliament has already tasked us to look at the cap and see what is a problem for implementing the Green Deal. We are in the middle of negotiating all of that with the European Parliament and the member states. And I think we still have quite a lot of room to maneuver to redirect the cap in the direction we want. I would not say that we need a completely new proposal for the cap for that. I think we can still steer in the negotiations the cap in the right direction, and you will be our most critical followers to see if we actually deliver on that. But I'm not disputing what the scientists are saying. I'm only saying if we want to reach what we want, if we want to achieve what we need to achieve, I think we would lose a lot of time if we would withdraw the whole proposal and come with a new proposal. I think there's still enough margin in the present proposal to steer it in the right direction. And again, let me stress this. We need the farmers on board for this, and we need to convince them that it is in their interest. And for that, we need a lot of negotiating, a lot of explaining, and step by step taking it in the right direction.
Does someone has a reaction for that? Okay, Tillman.
I think the question of time is very important, but it's more that the next decade will going to be decisive, and the cap is going to be for over 7 years. And if we fail with this cap, we're going to fail the change within agriculture, because if we want to reach Paris Agreement, we only have this next decade to get the ship around. And so especially the aspect of the direct payments, you already mentioned that they are failed even within their own objectives. So why do you stick to this old badly policies instead of making new ones that will work in order to challenge and tackle the climate crisis?
What we're doing at the Commission is trying to get the European Parliament and member states to move in the right direction. And this includes changing elements of the first pillar. There is absolutely no way just ending the first pillar or radically changing it would ever get us near an agreement with the member states and the European Parliament. So it is by gradual incremental reform taking us in the right direction, making the right proposals. And let me again reiterate, eco schemes are going to be, in the Commission's view, a way to make sure the common agriculture policy goes in the direction of the Green Deal. But my call on you is, yes, talk to me, keep me on edge, stay critical, but especially talk to your national governments, because they are the ones very often resisting these reforms that the Commission is also proposing. We will be pushing them and the European Parliaments, but you need to give us a hand in pushing them as well, because they will have to agree on this. And very often they are very reluctant because they are afraid this is going to be too burdensome on their farmers. So we need to convince them that it's in their interest to go in that direction.
Yes, very interesting, because afterwards the decision will be to the Council by the end of the day. So it will be also very important to put pressure on our national countries. If I can go before a next youth, is just to see, it's very important to also inform people, like you said, Mr. Timmermans, on how we eat, etc. But how can we make sure that they also have better access to better food that will be maybe more local, that will be maybe not from massive agriculture or massive industries? How can the citizens have easier access to this?
Well, please take your time also to look into our Farm to Fork strategy that addresses exactly this, combined with our biodiversity strategy, which is completely linked to this, because biodiversity needs a stark reduction of the use of pesticides and a better reduction of fertilization and a reduction of excessive fertilization. We need precision agriculture. We need to know exactly where our food comes from, what the quality of the food is, what the chains of production are. This is all extremely necessary, and that's what we propose in Farm to Fork and in biodiversity strategies. What I would propose to you is, we're talking a lot about the Common Agricultural Policy today and about Farm to Fork. It's only gotten out this week. So why don't we set up another webinar with you, or even a physical meeting once that's possible again, to go into these two strategies in more detail at next Friday when we have time and you're interested. Because I do believe with these two strategies, we also push the agricultural policy in the right direction, and we create the possibility for citizens to be better informed, so they know when they buy their food where it comes from, what the nutritional value is, and what the impact is on their health and on our environment.
Okay, I see Tilman wants to go further on that.
Yeah, I think that's a very cool offer. And I think in the Farm to Fork strategy, you mentioned a lot of practices that are quite useful for our future. But once again, as the cap is so important, it makes like 40% of the Europeans' budget, and it's like the instrument for change. And if we look at the carbon budget that is that the Paris Agreement shows us, how do you think, how can we reach this carbon budget within the current cap proposal that we have?
I think we still have, as I said, quite a large margin of maneuver in pushing the cap in the right direction in our dialogue with the co-legislators, meaning the European Parliament and the member states. The more the discussion about, as you are doing and the scientific community is doing, the more the discussion is going to be about identifying what we have in terms of budgets, in terms of space to use with emissions, the better informed we will also be to be able to steer cap reform in the right direction. But you know, you're talking to somebody who's had a couple of walks around the block in terms of negotiating with from the perspective of a member state or with member states. If we were now to say we withdraw the whole cap proposal, we come with a new one, we lose years. And I honestly believe that within the present proposal, there is still enough room to maneuver it and to steer it in a better, in the right direction. But the newest scientific insights, everything that's being developed, are going to be extremely necessary, because now, you know, because of the COVID crisis, the call to live healthier lives, to have healthier food, to have a sustainable rural area, these calls are going to get stronger. Once we come out of the immediate health crisis and we start tackling the economic crisis, I think the need for reform in this area is going to be felt more strongly than before.
Tillman.
I think it's Julian. Sorry.
Okay, I have another question, because you don't seem so sure that you have enough space to maneuver to change the current proposed cap. So what will you do if you fail, or if the Commission fails, and if it's not possible to change the current proposed cap enough, what will you do then? Then it's like 7 years later, and we have, it's maybe too late to change.
Well, you know, if the member states and the European Parliament follow our proposals, then already 40% of what we spent on common agricultural policy will be mainstreamed to create a sustainable agriculture. So I hope we can convince member states and the European Parliament to embrace that idea. That would already make a huge difference. I don't think failure is really an option. But we're not alone in this as Commission. We really need to convince a majority of member states and the European Parliament to go in that direction. I think the European Parliament is a bit in two minds because there are different interests there, but I think the majority of the European Parliament will support us to go into that direction. So now we have our work cut out for ourselves with the member states to also convince them to go in that direction. So, you know, you say, if you fail, what then? I just say failure is not an option, because the failure would mean further destruction of our biodiversity. Failure would mean uncertainty of our supply chains. Failure would mean further degradation of rural areas, which also lead to a more difficult situation in urban areas. So let's agree that we can't afford to fail.
Okay, I see no further questions for the youth at the moment. Maybe if someone still can ask a question, and then afterwards we can round off so that Timmermans has still time for his next meetings. Everyone is free to ask a question, except the press. No?
Otherwise, I think it's also very good to hear that failure is not an option, and also always good to take into account that now a plan is out, and we have to make sure that the Parliament and the Council does its job, and for that we are here. But it is also good to hear what the Commission's plan is, and to also hear from you. So thank you for your time. Guys, if you still have questions, don't hesitate to tell me. Otherwise, I think we can close it off here. We don't have to go into the 45 minutes if there is nothing else. And then that gives also a break to Mr. Timmermans before its next meeting.
But the only thing I would like to say is let this not be a one-off, you know. This is very informative. We can exchange our views. It goes quickly. It works well, also technically, even if in the beginning it was a bit difficult. But I think let's make this a regular meeting if that's okay with you, because it also helps me convince my colleagues and others, and it keeps you perhaps a bit better informed about what we're doing.
We will take that certainly into account. I see Guillaume from France still has a last question.
Thank you for your proposal. I just had one last question. Do you think the agricultural lobby will try to block the change in the CAP because they support big farmers, and the big farmers are currently the one getting the direct payments? So do you think they will try to block the change in the CAP because the change won't be good for the big farmers?
We've already seen different reactions from different parts of the farming community. In my experience, it's not just the big farmers, it's very often small farmers who are desperate because their income is so low and they are afraid about the future, who get sort of instrumentalized by the big farmers to protest. And at the end of the day, the ones who come out of this better are always the big farmers. And I think this is something that we really, really need to look into collectively. This is also a plea I have to you. This cannot be a strategy against farmers. This should be a strategy for farmers. You know, the world will need to feed up to 10 billion people, and we need to do it in a way that the world can sustain. And for doing that, we need sustainable agriculture that needs less pesticides, that needs less manure, that has to be more precise, that has to take nature conservation into consideration, and at the same time provide a decent income for farmers. That's a huge, tall order, but for that we need reform. And there will be those who will try and block the reform, but there are also those in the farming community who have understood that we need to do things in a different way. By supporting them, by also in this crisis unleashing more capacity for investment in ecological farming, in sustainable farming, by helping them also with new technologies, you know, so that they could do precision agriculture helped by 5G and other technologies. That's how we can get into the right direction. But please don't make this a fight from people who protect the environment against farmers. Then we will all lose.
Of course, I think the goal is always to unite if we want to do this transition right. I see that Julian had a last point.
Yes, I agree with you that we have to be with the farmers, and that's also our goal. We consider ourselves friends of farmers, but with the current CAP, you see it. Every day there are more and more farmers, they quit their jobs, and also for example, in Romania, there are farmers, they don't receive any subsidies because they are too small, and there are a lot of problems. And I'm still sure that with the current proposed CAP, it will be not possible to have it in a good manner, that we have a climate neutral future, and that we can that we don't have to worry about our future anymore. I think we have to really change the current proposed CAP.
Well, let's see how far we go with the margins we will use in the present CAP. And again, let's see how far we can go in convincing member states to embrace these ideas. You know that in the whole of the EU budget, we will want to spend 25% on projects that take us into a sustainable future. In the future, that will have to be a higher percentage. But in agriculture, it's going to be 40%. So that's already, I think, an indication of where we want to go. Let's create the biggest possible alliances to get us there, and let's put more pressure on the member states to accept these ideas, and then perhaps the present CAP can be redirected in the direction you and I want. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And let's aim for sustainable agriculture. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Timmermans. Thank you so much for your time. The youth that are representing all Europe. It's amazing to have you all today. I think, Bram, maybe one last word.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Timmermans, to be here with us and to listen to our advice and concerns. And I really hope, as you said, that we can continue this discussion because it is a really important topic and we need to be able to talk about this.
Okay.
So,
bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you very much. And if there is the press that wants to stay in for the questions and answers, please get on the Zoom link. Thank you.